Hey everyone, Sam here. Thanks for joining me. I hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you are in the world. So just a short video today. I recently painted this forest river landscape and I thought I'd show you a bit of the process. In the video I also give you some tips on creating atmospheric depth, getting your values right, and also a little bit about creating colour harmony within the painting. Now if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, all that good stuff, but for now we'll just get straight into the video. I'm painting on a 10" by 12" linen panel, and this is a medium weave oil primed Belgian linen that's mounted to Baltic birch. This panel's pre-made and made by a company called Seascape in the USA, and I find these panels really convenient for doing small to medium paintings in the studio and also great for plein air painting. Now what I'm doing here is I'm sketching out my composition. I'm using oil paints and I begin sketching out my composition using burnt sienna mixed with liquid original, which is going to help me speed up the drying time. It also thins the paint as well. Now I'll go over the oil paints I'm using for this artwork, and the colours I used include titanium white, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, cadmium orange, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue and phthalo green. I'm using a brand called Blue Ridge oil paints. They're an artist quality oil and they are just really beautiful to paint with. And if you want to get your hands on some Blue Ridge oil colours, I've put the link to their website in the description box below. Now although I'm using oil paint here, you could just as easily paint this in acrylics because the principles of tonality, values, colour mixing, it's the same. So once I've sketched out my composition, as I say in all my videos, the first thing I think about are where all the dark values are and shadows in the painting, and this particular scene is quite dark because we're in a forest, but then we've got some beautiful highlights on the rocks and the sparkles on the water and also that green glow of the foliage in the background, so it's making for quite a dramatic kind of painting because you've got that sharp contrast between the areas that are in quite deep shadow and full light. So I marked in my shadow areas of the rocks using a mix of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, a little alizarin crimson, and where I've needed to, I've mixed in titanium white to make the value lighter. So for some of those deep shadows I haven't used any, but then for the mid-tones in the rocks I've mixed in titanium white into that mix. The thing we need to remember with shadows and values is that we'll find our darkest darks and our lightest lights in the foreground, and that's what value refers to. It's how light or dark a subject is. Whereas as landforms recede, darks are not as dark and lights are not as light, and that's because the value scale narrows. But in the case of this painting, the whole scene is pretty much in the foreground, so we don't need to worry too much about receding values. Once I'd painted in the main areas of shadows within the painting, I then started from the back and worked forward in the painting, so marking in the areas where that green glow is. And for this I mixed yellow ochre with some cadmium yellow, ultramarine blue, and then I adjusted the value with some titanium white, making that colour lighter, and rounded off the green mix overall with some cadmium orange, because the red in that orange is opposite to green on the colour wheel, so it just helps to harmonise the green. You can also use other colours instead, like for the palette I'm using I could use alizarin crimson or burnt sienna. They're going to get some different colours. Or you could use cadmium red if you've got that in your palette. But I mixed some varying greens here for the different colours within the background forest here, so some different greens. And then after that I moved on to the water. Now the water is mainly influenced by the overhanging foliage and trees, but also some of the light that's passing through it as well, so we've got some greens and oranges in there. I'm keeping the mix really simple here, and I mainly used a mix of yellow ochre with burnt sienna, titanium white and ultramarine blue, and I've really used these three colours plus white in varying amounts. So for those areas in light I've used more yellow ochre and burnt sienna, also titanium white, and then for the shadow areas I've really gone much heavier on the ultramarine blue and much less titanium white. So when I paint artworks, one of the main things I try and do is maintain colour harmony throughout the painting, and the way we can do this is by carrying across common colours. So trying to use similar colours throughout the painting and actually using a more limited palette like I have done in this case helps with that, because it means we're more likely to use the colours that we've got. So with a colour harmonious painting, it's going to read much better to the viewer and it's going to be much more pleasing to the eye. I mix in ultramarine blue and a little yellow ochre for some of those deeper shadows within the water, especially when I mark out some of the boulders that are submerged beneath. Then once I've done that, I start adding some of the highlights within the painting. So here the highlights on the rocks, and this is a really light mix of titanium white with a little burnt sienna and yellow ochre. I also later on in the blocking in stage start marking in where the sparkles of the water that's shimmering in the full sunlight is going to go. I want to keep the value of the white darker so that I've got plenty of room to build up lighter layers within the painting, and then I'll be saving my final highlights and lightest values towards the end of the painting. So we want to keep the painting overall a bit darker as we work through it and layer on those lighter values. For the water here, I've used titanium white and then just mixed in a small amount of burnt sienna with ultramarine blue. Just a tiny amount that's just going to darken the value. Then when I layer on the lighter layers of white, it's really going to pop. Now, aside from restating the dark values within the painting, I finished up the blocking in stage by just working some of those areas, tidying some areas up and adding a bit more detail before I let it dry, and it's here that I want to create a good solid foundation to work from, and also need to check that my colours and values are all working and that everything is looking good. And then what I do is I leave it to dry, usually for a couple of days. Certainly the liquid that I've mixed in with the paint's going to speed up the drying time, but it's here that I can then start working the areas of the painting and building up some of the details. Now once the painting was dry, during this session I focused on modelling the paint and building up the detail within this scene. So for example, working on the background where the trees are and starting to build up the form of the tree, painting in some of those sky holes. Following this, I then spent a decent amount of time working on the water, just adding lighter layers and refining the whole form of it. And what I was doing with the water was building it up so that when I add those final highlights, the sparkles, it's really going to look good. I also added more layers to the rocks as well, so painting in some reflected light on the side of them especially just helps to build up the three-dimensional form. I then spent a bit more time working on the highlights of the rocks, adding some lighter layers than the previous layer but still using the same colours that I was using before. So this was a mix of titanium white with a little yellow ochre and burnt sienna. And I was using a number 3 filbert brush here, and the great thing about filbert brushes is you can use the broad end of the brush, but they also have a rounded tip so you can paint finer marks. So they're also really useful. Now the brushes I'm using in this painting are made by a company called Rosemary & Co, and if you want to grab some Rosemary & Co brushes, I've put a link in the description box below. I've been using these brushes for years, so I would totally recommend them. I worked on the rocks in the midground as well, towards the back of the stream in the painting, adding highlights there. And then the last part of this session of the painting was just adding some more details to the various zones within the scene and just building up the forms of things like the trees and the rocks, and generally preparing the whole thing so that I can add the final highlights once I've let the painting dry again. So here the painting was dry once again, so let's talk about adding some of these final highlights, which was in the sparkles in the water. What I did was I used a filbert brush again and added a lighter layer of white, just marking the general areas where the sunlight's passing through and illuminating the surface of the water. And this again was a mix of titanium white with just a tiny amount of burnt sienna and some ultramarine blue. Very small amount. Now after I'd marked in this area within the painting, I added more details to the other surrounding areas. But then I was able to actually, in the same session, come back and add some final highlights, and I was using really thick paint, pretty much titanium white straight from the tube with just a little bit of yellow ochre just to warm up the white, and a small amount of liquid impasto medium which just allows for thicker paint. With a number 0 synthetic round brush, I was pretty much just painting dots at this point. You have to be a bit patient, but it looks really cool when it's finished. Then the last part of the painting was just adding a few finishing touches and final details, things like reflected light within the leaves, twigs and branches, things like that. Now, I've only scratched the surface of this painting. I really just zoomed through it in this short video, but if you'd like to have a go at painting this, then check out the lesson notes to the blog post which I've put in the description box below. And also, I have a full-length version of this painting tutorial video available for sale from my website and also on my Patreon channel. So if you're a subscriber to Patreon, you get access to the full-length version of this video, which is well over an hour long. My Patreon channel is just $5 a month and you get a new video every month and access to all the previous videos. There's probably about 2 years worth of videos on there, so it's kind of like a landscape painting course. So I've put the link in the description box below. Now, one other thing before you go, I'm giving away a free ebook called Introduction to Oil Painting, which you can get by signing up to my email list. Again, I've put the link in the description box below. So it's all there to help you improve your painting skills, whether you're a complete beginner or a more advanced painter, and also just be involved in the beautiful world that is painting landscape art. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to give the video a like and subscribe to my channel. Also, feel free to leave me a comment in the comment section below. I read all of them and I really enjoy reading them as well. There's been some great suggestions in there too. Also, all the links that I mentioned earlier about Patreon videos, my website, all that kind of stuff, all in the description box below, so check that out. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you're having a beautiful day. Feel free to comment if you've got any suggestions of things that you'd like me to paint, and I will see you in the next video.